The air in the city park was crisp and cool, the kind of weather that makes people want to be outside but also keeps them moving just fast enough to stay warm. It was one of those busy afternoons where the world felt like it was spinning at double speed. The distant sounds of traffic honking mixed with the high-pitched laughter of children and the rustling of dry leaves underfoot. It was chaotic, but in a way that felt normal and safe. Sitting right in the middle of this energy was a man who was known to millions of people around the world, yet at this moment, he was just trying to be invisible. Keanu sat on a wooden bench that had been painted over so many times the grain of the wood was no longer visible. He was dressed in clothes that wouldn't catch anyone's eye: a dark jacket, a simple t-shirt, and a baseball cap pulled low over his forehead. He had a plain paper bag resting on his lap, and inside was a simple sandwich he had picked up from a deli around the corner. He wasn't wearing sunglasses, which was a risk, but he had learned over the years that if he kept his head down and didn't make eye contact, most people were too busy with their own lives to notice him. He just wanted 10 minutes to finish his lunch and breathe before he had to be on again. He took a bite of his sandwich and chewed slowly, letting his eyes wander. To his left, an elderly man was throwing a ball for a dog that was too excited to bring it back. The dog would run, grab the ball, and then run around the man in circles, refusing to drop it. It made Keanu smile a little. It was a simple, funny moment that had nothing to do with movies or scripts or red carpets. Just a man and his dog enjoying the day. He watched a young couple pushing a stroller, arguing playfully about which direction to walk. They looked happy, tired, and completely wrapped up in their own little world. For a few minutes, this was Keanu's reality. He was just an observer. The tension in his shoulders, the kind that builds up after long days on set, began to loosen. The city noise became a sort of music, a background hum that was strangely soothing. He watched a pigeon land near his foot, hoping for a crumb, but he shooed it away gently. He wasn't the type to feed the wildlife, he just wanted to eat his meal in peace. But as he reached for his bottle of water, something in his peripheral vision changed. The flow of the crowd seemed to shift. At the edge of the playground, which was about 50 yards away from where he sat, the chaotic energy spiked. It wasn't a loud noise, like a shout or a crash. It was more subtle. It was the visual of a small figure breaking away from the pack. A little boy, who looked to be about 6 or 7 years old, suddenly stopped running. He had been playing with a group of other kids, but for some reason, he had frozen in place. He was wearing a bright blue coat that stood out against the dull browns and greens of the park. He was standing near the swings, his head cocked to the side like a bird listening for a worm. The boy wasn't looking at the other children who were still running and screaming. He was looking straight ahead, directly at the man on the bench. Keanu noticed the stare immediately. Years of experience had given him a sort of sixth sense for when he was being watched. Usually, when he felt that gaze, it was followed by a smartphone being raised or a hesitant approach asking for a selfie. He braced himself for it. He put on a mental mask, preparing to be polite and kind, even though he just wanted to be alone. He took a sip of water to wash down the sandwich and waited to see what would happen next. The boy didn't wave. He didn't point or shout, "Look, it's that guy from the movie." Instead, he took a step forward. Then another. He walked with a strange determination for someone so small. He weaved through a couple walking their dog, dodging a teenager on a skateboard, all without taking his eyes off Keanu. The intensity of the boy's gaze was unnerving. It wasn't the look of a fan seeing a celebrity, it was the look of someone who had a specific mission. The people around the boy didn't seem to notice anything wrong. A woman, presumably his mother, was standing near the park entrance, busy checking her phone. She didn't see her son break away. She didn't see him walking with purpose across the grass toward a stranger. Keanu glanced at the woman, then back at the boy. He wondered if he should say something, like "Hey, buddy, where are you going?" but he didn't want to cause a scene. He hoped the boy was just going to run past him to the trash can or the water fountain. But the boy wasn't veering off course. He was heading right for the bench. As he got closer, Keanu could see the boy's face better. His expression was serious, almost severe. His brow was furrowed, and his lips were pressed into a thin line. He looked worried. The blue coat seemed a bit too big for him, hanging off his shoulders, making him look smaller and more fragile. The boy's hands were shoved deep into his pockets, and his walk was stiff, as if he were cold or nervous. Keanu felt a prickle of unease. This didn't feel like a fan encounter. The silence between them was growing louder as the distance closed. The boy was now just a few feet away. The laughter of the playground seemed to fade into the background, replaced by the sound of the boy's shoes crunching on the gravel path. Keanu stopped eating. He lowered his water bottle and leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on his knees. He wanted to appear smaller, less threatening, hoping to put the child at ease. The boy stopped right at the end of the bench. He was so close now that Keanu could see a smudge of dirt on the boy's cheek and a loose thread hanging from his sleeve. The boy didn't speak. He just stood there, breathing a little faster than normal, his chest rising and falling under the puffy coat. He looked Keanu up and down, checking him over, as if confirming that he was the right person. Keanu offered a soft smile, trying to bridge the gap. He kept his voice low and calm. "Hey there," he said quietly. "Are you okay?" The boy didn't smile back. He didn't say a word. Instead, he took one final step forward, closing the gap completely. He leaned in close, invading Keanu's personal space, but not in a rude way. It was urgent. The boy looked around quickly, checking to see if anyone was listening, before he leaned right up to Keanu's ear. The park was still bustling. The dog was still barking. The couple was still strolling. But on that bench, the world had shrunk down to just two people. Keanu held his breath, waiting for the boy to speak, waiting for whatever request or observation was coming. He watched the boy's lips part, and he knew that whatever happened next was going to change the quiet afternoon he had been hoping for. The boy leaned in even closer, his small body pressing against the edge of the wooden bench. The air between them seemed to stand still. For a man who was used to cameras flashing and loud directors shouting orders, this sudden, quiet intimacy was jarring. Keanu stayed perfectly still, like a statue, not wanting to scare the child away. He could smell the faint scent of playground dirt and childish shampoo on the boy. He waited. The boy cupped his hands around his mouth, making sure his words were for Keanu and Keanu alone. His voice was barely a squeak, trembling with a mix of fear and urgency. "I can't find my mom," the boy whispered, his breath warm against Keanu's ear. "And I think someone is watching me." The words hit Keanu like a physical weight. One second he was an actor eating a sandwich, and the next, he was a protector. The casual afternoon vibe vanished instantly, replaced by a cold spike of adrenaline. He didn't smile, and he didn't dismiss it. He knew that in a city this big, a lost child was a nightmare scenario, but a child who feels hunted, that was an emergency. Keanu pulled back just an inch so he could look the boy in the eyes. He searched the child's face for any sign that this was a prank or a game, but what he saw stopped his heart. The boy's lower lip was quivering. His eyes, wide and glossy, were darting around the park as if shadows were coming to life. He wasn't looking for attention, he was looking for safety. "Okay," Keanu said, his voice dropping to a serious, steady tone. He kept his body language open and calm, trying to be the anchor this boy needed. "It's going to be okay. You are with me now." He placed a hand gently on the boy's shoulder. The touch was firm but careful, a silent promise that he wasn't going to let anything happen to him. The boy let out a small, shaky breath and nodded, but he didn't relax. He kept his hands balled into fists in his jacket pockets. "I was by the swings," the boy added, his voice cracking. "I looked for a second, and she was gone. Then a man in a gray coat looked at me, and he started walking." A gray coat. The detail was specific, and it made the threat feel real. Keanu's eyes immediately shifted from the boy to the crowd. He began to scan the area with a new focus. He wasn't looking at the scenery anymore. He was hunting. He was looking for anything that didn't fit. He was looking for a man in a gray coat who was paying too much attention to a child. The park, which had seemed peaceful just moments ago, now felt entirely different. The happy noise of the playground sounded like a distraction. The clusters of people sitting on the grass seemed like hiding spots. Every grown man standing alone suddenly looked suspicious. Keanu felt a surge of protective instinct that was stronger than anything he had felt in a movie scene. There were no scripts here. No second takes. He stood up slowly. He didn't want to make a sudden movement that would draw a crowd or scare the boy even more. As he rose to his full height, he towered over the child, creating a physical barrier between the boy and the rest of the world. He didn't care about his lunch anymore. He didn't care about being recognized. He stepped slightly in front of the boy, shielding him. "Did you see where the man went?" Keanu asked, keeping his voice low. The boy shook his head, clutching the back of Keanu's jacket. "No, I just ran to you because you look nice." It was a strange thing to hear that he looked nice, especially considering the dark roles he often played on screen. But right now, he was grateful for it. He was grateful that this terrified child saw a safe harbor in him rather than just another stranger. Keanu put a hand on the boy's head, a protective gesture, and turned his body so he was facing the direction of the playground. He needed to get control of the situation before it spiraled. He knew that panic was the enemy right now. If the boy panicked, he might run. If the crowd panicked, a real threat might disappear into the chaos. He had to be the calm in the center of the storm. He squeezed the boy's shoulder reassuringly. "Stay right here. Don't move," he commanded softly. The boy nodded, gripping Keanu's leg like it was a lifeline. Keanu scanned the faces near the swings. He saw a father pushing a daughter, a grandmother reading a book, a teenager listening to music. No gray coat. Not yet. But the feeling of unease was growing. He could feel it in his gut, the instinct that tells you when something is wrong. He looked back at the path where the boy had come from, trying to retrace the child's steps. Suddenly, the boy tugged on Keanu's sleeve. "There," he whispered, pointing a shaking finger toward a cluster of trees about 50 yards away. Keanu snapped his head in that direction. There was a figure standing there, half hidden by the trunk of an old oak tree. It was a man. He was standing perfectly still, looking directly at them. He wasn't looking at a phone. He wasn't looking at a map. He was staring, and as Keanu watched, the man in the gray coat took a step forward, then stopped, assessing the situation. The sight of that man sent a chill down Keanu's spine. It wasn't just that he was there, it was the way he was looking at them. It was predatory. Keanu's jaw tightened. The relaxed stranger was gone completely. The John Wick intensity, the one he usually saved for the camera, flared up in his eyes. He knew he couldn't just stand there anymore. He had to act, and he had to act now. He looked down at the boy. "You did good telling me," he said, his voice fierce. "I've got you." The boy looked up, his eyes filled with hope and fear. He trusted Keanu completely, handing over his safety to a stranger on a bench. Keanu felt the heavy weight of that trust. He knew that in the next few seconds, everything could change. The peace of the afternoon was about to shatter. He took a deep breath, preparing himself to move, to confront the man, to shout for help whatever it took. The man by the trees took another step. He was moving faster now. The distance was closing. Keanu shifted his stance, ready to intercept. The calm was over. The panic was just beginning to stir in the pit of his stomach, but he pushed it down. He had to be strong. He had to be the hero this boy needed him to be, even if there were no cameras rolling. The wind picked up, rustling the leaves and masking the sound of footsteps. Keanu locked eyes with the figure in the distance. A silent challenge passed between them. Whatever happened next, it was going to happen fast. The boy pressed his face into Keanu's coat, trying to hide. Keanu put a strong arm around the small shoulders, pulling him in tight. He wasn't going to let go. The man in the gray coat didn't move for what felt like a long time. He just stood there, half hidden behind the rough bark of the old oak tree, staring at them. It was a heavy, uncomfortable stare that made the hair on the back of Keanu's neck stand up. The air between them felt charged, like the quiet moment before a thunderstorm breaks. Keanu didn't look away. He kept his eyes locked on the stranger, his body tensing up, muscles ready to spring into action if he had to. He knew he couldn't let this man get any closer to the boy. With a smooth, slow motion, Keanu maneuvered his body. He stepped sideways, deliberately putting himself directly in the line of sight between the boy and the stranger. It was a protective move, like a goalkeeper blocking a shot, but much more serious. He used his height and his broad shoulders to create a wall, hiding the small child in the blue coat from view. He didn't want that man to see the boy's face ever again. "Listen to me," Keanu said to the boy, keeping his voice low and steady, but with an edge of steel that the child had probably never heard before. "I want you to sit on the bench right now. Put your hood up. Keep your head down. Don't look at him. Just look at the ground." The boy didn't argue. He could feel the change in Keanu's mood. He felt the tension radiating off the man standing over him. He scrambled onto the wooden bench, pulling his knees up to his chest and burying his face in his arms, making himself as small as possible. He was shaking, terrified, but he did exactly what he was told. Keanu turned his full attention back to the trees. The man in the gray coat seemed to realize the game had changed. He had been spotted. The element of surprise was gone. He shifted his weight, turning slightly as if he was deciding whether to walk away or come closer. Keanu took a step forward, away from the bench. It was a warning step. He didn't shout, but his posture screamed, "Come any closer and you'll regret it." The stranger hesitated. He looked at Keanu, really looked at him, perhaps finally recognizing the famous face or perhaps just realizing that this wasn't a man he wanted to mess with. The tension stretched tight like a rubber band. Then, the man in the gray coat turned abruptly. He didn't run, but he walked away very quickly, heading toward the crowded subway entrance on the far side of the park. He disappeared into the stream of people, blending into the crowd like a drop of water in the ocean. The immediate physical threat was gone, but the adrenaline pumping through Keanu's veins was just getting started. He didn't relax. He knew that the man could circle back, or that he could have friends nearby. Keanu's eyes scanned the entire perimeter of the park now, moving with precision. He looked at the people sitting on the grass, the joggers passing by, the teenagers on their phones. Everyone looked suspicious to him in that moment. He turned back to the boy. "He's gone," Keanu said softly, trying to bring his heart rate down. "But we stay sharp." "Okay." The boy peeked out from his hoodie, his eyes red and wet. He nodded, sniffing loudly. Suddenly, Keanu realized that his reaction had drawn attention. His sudden movement from the bench, his aggressive stance toward the trees, and the way he was scanning the crowd looked intense. People nearby had stopped talking. A man walking his dog had paused to watch. A woman reading on a nearby blanket had lowered her book. They could all sense that something dramatic had just happened. They could feel the shift in the atmosphere. Keanu knew he needed help. He couldn't do this alone. He spotted a security guard walking the usual beat near the fountain. The guard was looking at his phone, unaware of the drama that had just unfolded 50 yards away. Keanu didn't wait. He didn't worry about being polite or waiting for the guard to notice him. He raised a hand high in the air and waved it aggressively. "Hey!" Keanu shouted. The sound of his voice cut through the park noise like a knife. It wasn't a scream of panic, but a loud, commanding shout that demanded attention. "Guard! Over here!" The security guard's head snapped up. He looked around, confused, until he saw the tall man in the dark jacket waving him down. Then the guard saw the terrified little boy curled up on the bench, and his face changed. He started running toward them, his hand moving to the radio on his shoulder. This was the moment the calm afternoon shattered. Keanu's shout acted like a starting gun for the panic around them. People who were just relaxing moments ago were now sitting up, looking around with worried faces. The couple with the stroller stopped arguing and looked over in fear. The elderly man with the dog grabbed his pet's leash tighter. Everyone could see the urgency. Everyone could see that a child was in distress and a man was shouting for help. The confusion began to ripple outward like waves in a pond. Whispers started spreading through the crowd. "What's happening? Is that Keanu Reeves? Did someone get hurt? Is that man dangerous?" Keanu ignored the whispers. He kept his eyes on the path where the stranger had disappeared, and then back on the boy. He reached out and put a hand on the boy's back, rubbing it gently to keep him calm while the security guard sprinted toward them. The guard was young, probably not much older than 20, and he looked nervous as he approached, likely realizing he was dealing with a situation that was way above his pay grade. "Sir, is everything okay?" the guard asked as he arrived, slightly out of breath, his eyes darting between the movie star and the crying child. Keanu didn't waste time with pleasantries. He pointed toward the trees, then toward the subway entrance where the man had vanished. "There was a man," Keanu said, his voice low and dangerous. "Gray coat. Watching the kid. The boy says he was following him. He went that way." The security guard's eyes went wide. He grabbed his radio and started speaking into it quickly, calling for backup and describing the suspect. As he spoke, the panic level in the park jumped up another notch. Seeing a security guard calling for backup made everyone realize this wasn't a joke. This wasn't a movie scene. It was real. A few people stood up and started moving away from the area, not wanting to be in the middle of whatever was happening. Others pulled out their phones, not to take selfies, but to record the scene or to call the police. The mood had shifted completely from peaceful to chaotic. The air felt thick with anxiety. And in the center of it all stood Keanu, grounded as a rock, acting as the shield for a terrified little boy he had never met before. He looked down at the child again. The boy was looking at the security guard with wide eyes, unsure if he was safe yet. Keanu crouched down so he was eye level with the boy, blocking out the growing commotion behind him. "We are going to find your mom," Keanu said, his voice soft again, full of warmth. "Nobody is going to hurt you. I promise." The boy looked at Keanu, and for the first time, the terror in his eyes began to recede, just a little bit. He saw a protector. He saw a hero. But the storm was still raging around them, and it was about to get much louder before it got quiet again. The panic had started, and now they had to ride it out. The static on the security guard's radio was like a spark in a dry forest. It didn't take long for the small flame of confusion to spread into a blazing wildfire of panic. As the guard spoke into his shoulder, his voice urgent and clipped, people nearby stopped what they were doing. They sensed the fear. Humans are like animals that way, we can smell danger in the air before we even see it. The relaxed atmosphere of the park evaporated instantly, replaced by a jittery, nervous energy that made everyone hold their breath a little tighter. While Keanu stood like a wall in front of the boy, scanning the tree line, the chaos was beginning to brew somewhere else entirely. On the other side of the playground, near the iron gates where the paths met, the woman who had been checking her phone finally looked up. She had her thumb on the screen, halfway through typing a message, when she realized the background noise of the playground had changed. The specific sound of her son's loud laughter, which she could usually pick out of 100 other kids, was missing. She froze. Her thumb hovered over the glass of her phone. She spun around in a quick circle, her eyes darting over the swings, the slide, and the sandbox. Blue coat. Blue coat. Where is the blue coat? The little boy in the bright blue jacket was nowhere to be seen. The blood drained from her face. She called out his name, but her voice was weak at first, choked by a sudden rising terror. She called out again, louder this time, but the word got lost in the wind. She started walking, then jogging, pushing past people without apologizing. "Have you seen a little boy blue coat 7 years old?" she asked a stranger, but the person just looked at her with a blank, confused face. Then, she saw it. She saw the crowd gathered near the benches. She saw the security guard running, and she saw the tall man in the dark jacket standing over a small child sitting on a bench. To a mother whose heart is currently hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird, perspective is everything. She didn't see a protector. She saw a stranger looming over her son. Panic, raw and blinding, took over. She didn't think. She just screamed. It wasn't a normal scream, it was a sound that comes from the bottom of the soul, a wail of pure horror that tore through the park air like a siren. "That is my baby. Let him go." The scream acted like a shockwave. People who were only mildly curious seconds ago jumped in fright. Heads snapped toward the sound. The ripple effect was instantaneous. The crowd near the benches turned to see a woman sprinting toward them, her face twisted in fear, her hair flying wild behind her. She looked like a woman possessed, running with the desperate speed of someone trying to outrun death. The onlookers, seeing a woman screaming about a baby and a strange man near a child, immediately jumped to the worst possible conclusion. The whispers started instantly, flying through the crowd like electricity. Is he taking him? Did he grab the kid? Oh my God, call the police. Is that a movie star? What is he doing? The panic mutated. It wasn't just about a lost child anymore, it was now about a threat. People began to scramble. A man eating a hot dog stood up and backed away, pulling his daughter with him. A teenager stopped filming a TikTok dance and started filming the confrontation, zooming in on Keanu's intense face. The circle around the bench widened, but also thickened. People were trapped by their own curiosity and fear. They wanted to run, but they needed to see what happened next. The mother was closing the distance, screaming words that didn't make sense, pleading with God, cursing the air. Keanu heard her coming. He turned his head slightly, but he didn't move his feet. He knew that if he stepped away from the boy now, it would look like he was guilty of something. He knew he had to hold his ground, no matter how bad this looked. The security guard stepped toward the running woman, arms outstretched to slow her down, but she was impossible to stop. She was fueled by adrenaline. She shoved past the guard, never taking her eyes off the back of her son's head. "Don't you touch him!" she shrieked, her voice cracking. Keanu saw the terror in her eyes. He understood immediately. She wasn't seeing him, she was seeing a nightmare scenario where her child was being snatched. He didn't take offense. He felt a deep, aching pity for her. He knew exactly what that kind of fear felt like, the kind that freezes your lungs. The woman reached the bench, gasping for air, her chest heaving. The little boy looked up, hearing the familiar voice. "Mom," he squeaked. The sight of his face broke something in her. She lunged forward, grabbing the boy's arm, trying to pull him off the bench. "Get back! Get away from him!" She yelled at Keanu, swinging a protective arm around her child as if to shield him from a blow. The crowd gasped. Phones were held higher. Everyone was waiting for the actor to react, to get angry, to shout back. But Keanu didn't move an inch. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't try to defend himself with words. He simply let the woman pull the boy into a crushing hug. He watched as the boy buried his face in her neck and started to sob. The scene was chaotic and loud. The security guard was trying to talk into his radio while shouting at people to step back. The mother was alternating between kissing her son's head and glaring daggers at Keanu, convinced for a split second that this man was the reason her baby was lost. But then, the boy pulled his face away from his mother's shoulder. He looked at Keanu with red, swollen eyes. He wasn't looking at Keanu like a villain. He was looking at him like a hero. "Mom, stop," the boy hiccuped, his voice small but firm over the noise of the crowd. "He saved me." The mother froze. Her angry words died in her throat. She looked down at her son, then up at Keanu. She really looked at him for the first time. She saw the calmness in his eyes. She saw the gentle way his hands were raised, open and harmless. She saw the famous face that she had seen in movies 100 times, looking at her not with annoyance, but with profound understanding. The tension in the air snapped, replaced by a confused silence. The crowd leaned in, waiting. Keanu slowly lowered his hands. He looked at the mother, his expression softening. He spoke quietly, but his voice carried in the sudden hush of the park. "He was scared," Keanu said gently. "There was a man watching him by the trees. A gray coat. The boy came to me. He just needed someone to stand with him until you came back." The mother's face crumbled. The anger drained out of her, replaced by a wave of overwhelming relief that almost knocked her off her feet. her knees buckled, and she slumped onto the bench right next to where Keanu had been sitting. She grabbed her son again, holding him so tight it looked like it hurt, and she began to weep. Not the screaming panic from before, but deep, racking sobs of gratitude and exhaustion. The man in the gray coat was gone. The immediate danger was over. But the panic had left its mark on the park. The onlookers were still buzzing, adrenaline pumping through their veins. They looked at Keanu with a mix of awe and confusion. They had come for a picnic, but they had just witnessed a life and death situation. They realized that while they were drinking coffee and checking emails, a child had been terrified, and a stranger had stepped up to protect him. Keanu stood there for a moment, watching the mother and son reunite. He didn't look for applause. He didn't look at the cameras. He just looked at the ground, taking a slow, deep breath to let his own heart rate settle. He reached down and picked up the water bottle he had dropped earlier, his hand steady. The storm was passing, but the memory of those few minutes of panic would stay with everyone there for a long time. The noise in the park didn't stop all at once, it faded away slowly, like a wave pulling back from the shore. The screaming was replaced by the sound of heavy breathing and quiet sniffling. The mother was slumped on the bench, her arms wrapped so tightly around her son that it looked like she was trying to melt into him. She was weeping, not just tears of relief, but tears of pure, exhausting release. The terror of the last 10 minutes was draining out of her, leaving her shaking. Keanu stood there for a moment, his hands resting loosely by his sides. He watched them, his face soft and unreadable. The adrenaline that had been pumping through his veins was starting to fade, leaving him feeling a bit tired but mostly just glad. He looked at the security guard, who had stopped talking on his radio and was now standing awkwardly a few feet away, looking relieved that he didn't have to tackle a movie star. Keanu gave the guard a small nod, a silent signal that everything was under control, and the guard stepped back, giving the family some space. The little boy pulled his head back from his mother's shoulder. His face was blotchy and wet, but his eyes were dry now. He looked at Keanu with a seriousness that didn't match his age. He seemed to understand that this man had done something important for him. "Thank you," the boy whispered. It was so quiet that almost no one heard it, but Keanu did. Keanu crouched down one last time so he was eye level with the child. He didn't say anything heroic. He didn't make a big speech. He just reached out and gently squeezed the boy's knee. "You were brave," Keanu said softly. "You did the right thing coming to find someone. Never forget that." Then he stood up and looked at the mother. She had wiped her eyes with the back of her hand and was trying to compose herself. She looked at Keanu, really seeing him now, away from the blur of panic. She recognized the face, of course, but in that moment, the fame didn't matter. What mattered was the kindness. I am so sorry," she stammered, her voice raspy from screaming. I didn't know. Thank you. Thank you so much." Keanu shook his head, cutting her off gently. He didn't want an apology. He didn't need to be thanked. "Don't worry about it," he said, his voice low and raspy. "He's safe. That's all that matters. Just keep him close." The mother nodded frantically, clutching her son's hand as if she would never let it go again. She looked like she wanted to say more, maybe ask for a photo or tell everyone who he was, but she saw the look in Keanu's eyes. It was a look that said he had done his part and now he just wanted to disappear. She respected that silent wish. She just nodded again, her eyes filled with gratitude, and pulled her son into a hug once more. Keanu turned away from the bench. The crowd that had gathered was still watching, but the mood was completely different now. There were no angry whispers or fearful gasps. People were smiling. Someone clapped slowly, and then a few others joined in, but it wasn't a loud applause. It was a respectful, quiet acknowledgement of what had just happened. It was the sound of people realizing that they had witnessed something genuine. Keanu didn't look at the crowd. He didn't wave or smile for the cameras that were still pointed at him. He simply bent down and picked up the sandwich wrapper he had dropped on the ground earlier. He crumpled it in his hand and looked around for a trash can. He found one a few feet away, walked over, and threw the wrapper away. It was such a normal, small thing to do, but it grounded the moment. It reminded everyone that despite the drama, this was just a real-life situation involving real, normal people. He took a deep breath of the cool air. The crisis was over. The man in the gray coat was gone, vanished back into the city, and the boy was back where he belonged. Keanu felt the weight on his shoulders lift. He adjusted his cap, pulling it low again, and shoved his hands deep into the pockets of his jacket. He turned his back on the bench and started walking down the winding path that led out of the park. As he walked, the chatter of the park began to return to normal levels. The dogs started barking again. The children went back to playing on the swings, perhaps a little more watched over by their parents than before. The incident was already becoming a story for the people who had seen it, a story they would tell their friends at dinner that night. He walked with that familiar, long-strided gait, moving effortlessly through the dining crowd. A few people stepped aside to let him pass, murmuring to each other as he went. They saw a man who was usually larger than life on movie screens, but today he was just a person who stopped to help when it mattered. He didn't seek a reward. He didn't wait for the news crews to arrive. He just stepped into a scary situation, stood his ground, and made sure a child was safe. By the time he reached the edge of the park, the panic of the afternoon felt like a distant memory. The city sounds of traffic and honking horns replaced the rustling leaves and playground noise. Keanu blended back into the flow of the pedestrians, just another face in the millions of faces in the city. He turned the corner, disappearing from view, leaving behind a park that felt a little safer and a group of strangers who had been reminded that good people still exist in the world. The little boy and his mother were still on the bench, watching him go. The boy held his mother's hand tight, but he wasn't scared anymore. He knew that even in a crowd of strangers, there were heroes walking around. You just had to know who to look for. And as for Keanu, he just kept walking, happy in the knowledge that for once, he got to be the hero in real life, with no script and no second takes.